regarding the reports I've seen about the Chinese planning to build a canal through Nicaragua. My question is such a canal necessary? And secondly, if it is, why isn't the United States involved in this? And what is the opinion of the department regarding this canal? And what are the implications if, in fact, the Chinese succeed?
So the case of the canal through Nicaragua and the Chinese involvement, which so far is a Chinese financier who is involved, who continues to insist that it is entirely separate from the Chinese government or state-owned enterprises. I say that with a smile. That the whole process of the canal in Nicaragua has not been, shall we say, a transparent process. Neither the licitation of it, nor the studies on the environmental impact, nor most of the feasibility studies that preceded that. Obviously, Nicaragua has had a dream of a canal, dry, wet, or otherwise, for many, many years. This comes at the same time as the Panama Canal expansion, though delayed, will take place in the coming year. And I think, they've broken ground on what I'm quite certain will be a road and possibly a port, but I'm not at all certain will be a canal. So I think, and you've had significant pushback from indigenous and other communities that are in the areas that will be destroyed or very severely affected by the development involved in such a canal. Our position has always been, we've not taken a fundamental position on whether there should or should not be a canal. We have taken a very strong position on the lack of transparency in the process, which we object to greatly and think has got to be changed, both for Nicaraguans who have asked questions about this process and for the larger question of whether this is being done properly and is it really necessary and viable.
Timothy Towell, 30 years in the Foreign Service, most of it what we used to call ARA. I don't know why you changed it.
I still do that sometimes.
We mentioned China as a competitor in our hemisphere. What about Iran being influential in our hemisphere? We read a lot. We read a lot about that wonderful president of Argentina, Mrs. Kirchner. But she has been receiving substantial support and funds from Iran to purchase nuclear materials a few years ago and to try and make the whole world forget the Iranian role in blowing up the Jewish Community Center in Buenos Aires in 1994. Substantial bank accounts of Mrs. Kirchner's family and in Venezuela, Tehran, and in Delaware, I-95 here. And the new Secretary General of the OAS next month, Foreign Minister Bourba, very close ties to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. Are we paying close attention to the role of Iran in this ministry of ours?
No, it's a good question. The answer is that we pay extremely close attention to Iran in the hemisphere because, as Secretary Clinton said and Secretary Kerry has repeated, unlike China, where we think that as long as they are playing by the rules, including transparency and environmental and labor rules, we don't always see their presence or involvement as negative. The involvement of Iran in the hemisphere is never benign. And I want to underscore that. It's never benign. So we watch it extremely closely. I think we differ a little bit in the question of influence of Iran in the hemisphere. Iran has signed an enormous number of agreements with countries in the region, almost none of which have come to any real fruition or benefit for the countries of the hemisphere. And in the beginning of those agreements, they were greeted with a great deal of enthusiasm by Bolivia or Venezuela or Argentina or others, because there was a belief they would be followed through, and there would be either personnel or expertise or funds. That became increasingly impossible under Iran's economic situation, sanctions, etc. Iran, of course, had every incentive to be looking both for friends for sort of public relations reasons and countries in which they could attempt to evade sanctions. But frankly, more and more countries throughout the region have cottoned on to the fact that those agreements are relatively meaningless, except for some countries who haven't found others that will partner with them. So we do not actually find that there is a growing influence of Iran in the region, but there is a persistent desire to be present that we monitor extremely closely. And, you know, there are very few, either interior or IGRC from Iran in the hemisphere, but that is obviously the particular focus of both the intelligence community and ourselves. And we work really closely with the intel community on making sure that we know at a constant pace what's going on. I do think that there are fewer countries that kind of get hoodwinked by that. And even in Argentina, where the government has defended the engagement, it's been highly controversial. And I think as things begin to come apart in Argentina and the term winds down, this has been more and more transparently, you know, not of benefit to Argentina.
Roberta, thank you very much. I'm Christopher Webster. Thank you very much for a very interesting and useful overview of U.S. policy in Latin America. I particularly appreciated the explanation you gave of President Obama's decision to open U.S. relationship with Cuba. And I'd like to ask you whether we think that you talked about U.S. interest in building the Cuban entrepreneurial sector. Do we really believe that the Cuban government will allow that assistance to flourish and to lead to an opening of the Cuban economy? Thank you.
No, that's the fundamental question. And the fundamental question is sort of, okay, how much of this will they permit? How much of this will they permit economically, and how much will they permit politically? And the fundamental premise of the policy was to remove us as an excuse, the narrative that's been going on for so long. And so right after the president announced the policy change, you heard the Cuban government saying, yeah, but they didn't lift the embargo and they could have done more. And it was like, seriously? You know, but you could understand why they did that, because they wanted to be able to continue the narrative that privation and control was still necessary because we hadn't done as much as we could and we hadn't lifted the embargo. The fact is that if you look at the Ben Dixon poll that came out a couple of weeks ago and the Telemundo Maris poll that were both done on the island, that narrative doesn't fly. We really did change the perception on the island that it is not our sort of fault anymore, and that this engagement is going to be a positive thing for Cubans. The expectations aren't too high, there's no doubt about that in terms of how rapidly things may change, but that genie is kind of out of the bottle. So the real question is, how much will they permit? And I think there is a sense that there's a real concern about what they have brought, right? How much can they control this? On the other hand, they are absolutely cutting back on state enterprises by necessity. They are putting people out of work for the first time. And those people, in order not to be a social problem, have to have something else to do. So it is in their economic interest to allow just enough of this to ensure social peace. And that's the balance that they're going to have to try and have. And meanwhile, we are going to do everything we can to continue to push that space open, because the thing that struck me the most when I was there talking to these entrepreneurs is they've made that psychological shift from dependence on the state to dependence on themselves. And that is revolutionary. One more?
Time for one more question.
Yes, I can.
Good morning. Thank you, Assistant Secretary Jacobson, for a very informative presentation. My name is Philip Druin. I'm a retired economic firm Service Officer. I worked on the NAFTA negotiations in the early 90s, and I was also a desk officer on the Canada desk when Canada used to be part of Europe. I was just wondering, given our important relationship with government and Ottawa and Canadians, not always the most difficult most cooperative ally to work with, but I wanted an essential partnership with nonetheless. Perhaps you could characterize your working relationship.
I thank you for asking that because it is sort of the Rodney Dangerfield of relationships, right? We don't get enough respect. And I do think that we far too often, and the Canadians will tell us this, take them for granted. And the Canadian relationship as a bilateral relationship and the trilateral relationship within NAFTA is essential for our own competitiveness, but also for our own ability to operate in the world the way we want to, whether it is, frankly, just recently evacuating people from Nepal, helping with some of their citizens and them doing the same with ours. Canada has the third largest Ukrainian population in the world and has been very aggressive on Ukraine and always with us, sometimes slightly ahead of us, on Ukraine. And it has been really important to work with Canada on critical issues for us. And we often have a tendency to thank our European partners. And I'm usually sitting there going, no, wait, where's Canada in there? I'm usually a little better off if we thank our NATO partners, because at least they're part of that. So it's critical. But the other thing that we really work closely on, and by necessity, but also because we benefit so greatly from it, is Canada is still a nation that is by state policy encouraging immigration, right? And the vast majority of immigrants coming into Canada are from South Asia. And Canada's population of its Muslim communities are both long-standing and new, right? There's both in Canada. And so our work with Canada to both have outreach to long-established and very moderate Muslim populations, as well as assimilating and working with new Muslim immigrants and combating violent extremism, have been invaluable because we have different populations and different laws in terms of privacy and ways of dealing with this. But the sharing of this data as well as intelligence has been invaluable in our own efforts to combat violent extremism and to work on counterterrorism issues. So it's an essential partnership that doesn't always get as much attention as it should. Canada will shortly go into election hibernation, but it's much shorter than ours, intense but shorter. But I think it is a relationship that you'll see kind of a renewed push for. Thank you all so much.